Welcome to GitHub for Cats. I'm Eric Steinborn, and I'm going to be your guide today. So you might be wondering what you just watched. You just watched the official GitHub music video, Better Together. And since we're at a presentation called GitHub for Cats, you watched the most viewed video on YouTube about cats with over 72 million views. Pretty cool. My goal for you today, though, is that you get a firm understanding of what GitHub is, you learn how to start using it, but more importantly, that you realize how you can use GitHub to actually work for you, right? Use it for your teams and how you can make your teams better because of it. So let's start with the first most important question: why call it GitHub for Cats? Well, GitHub's mascot is actually a cross between an octopus and a cat called an octocat. See it here on the screen. Now, GitHub's employees love to make little renditions of their beloved mascot, such as the Jean-Luc the cat, for my Trekkie fans out there, fellow Trekkie fans, I might add, and the Iron Cat for any Iron Man fans out there. If you want to take a look at the presentation afterwards, you can take a look at their Octodex, where they feature all of their renditions that they've created. They're official renditions. Official GitHub employees create these. But what I also wanted to do was give it a title that meant that GitHub was easy to use. So the subtitle, GitHub is so easy your cat could use it, is what I'm trying to imply here. And I hope that later on today, by the end of the presentation, you'll agree. So now that the most important question is out of the way, the second most important question is going to be, what is GitHub anyway? Well, GitHub is version control for your project. Now, saying just version control is selling it rather short. It's actually version control with a big set of collaborative tools and project management features. And as of yesterday, I found this video, so I'd actually like to show it to you. And I want to apologize in advance for the alien music, aka dubstep, that they throw into the center of it.
I think that the people using GitHub are definitely changing the world. And what we're doing is we're providing the tools and the platform for them to make their ideas real.
There aren't different types of companies anymore. There are just software companies. If we do our jobs correctly, GitHub will certainly be a part of that.
Anyone that's ever used Wikipedia is familiar with version control. And the way we use it with Git at GitHub is we take that exact same model and we apply it to source code.
GitHub was meant to make Git easy enough to use that anyone could use it. If you use the tools the same way that we do, you can really unlock the next level of working together better.
In the early days, it was about removing friction from the software development process. And now it's about how can we imagine a better process and how can we get everybody there.
We intended GitHub to be used for software. So these tools, these collaborative platforms, you can use it for all sorts of stuff.
Many, many different professions are all collaborating around something. Using everything that we've learned should lend itself to helping other professions work better together.
I think GitHub's making it easier for people to work remote. I think working remotely is the future of business.
We realized that it could be a big thing. It could be a big deal. It could solve a real problem people had.
It was sort of this meeting of the minds that allowed us to form the foundation of GitHub, and the rest is history, so to speak.
GitHub, it's crazy just to see the amount of ideas, the amount of momentum, the amount of excitement going on all over the world right now by people that are building software.
We keep growing, and it continuously gets bigger and more interesting.
The way that we remain hungry is to continue on the mission that we started 5 years ago. Let's just build this incredible collaboration platform. It's constantly being inspired and excited about what we're working on that will allow us to carry forward for years and decades to come.
That's the last video today, I promise. So GitHub is changing the world. How is it changing the world? Well, it's become the de facto standard for project development. So you have millions of users, over 10 million repositories or projects that are hosted on GitHub, and it features enough time that just won't quit. there are many jobs out there that actually list GitHub knowledge as a requirement. And I don't blame them, right? Because if you're not using version control, you should be using version control. And if you're using version control, you should be using GitHub. Because whether you want a private repository that only you and your team have access to, or you have a public repository where you want to share your code with the world, GitHub allows you to do that. So what is version control? Right? I've mentioned it numerous times so far. Version control simply put, is you're keeping old versions of your files for archival use that you can also go back to. You can look at them throughout time. You can restore. You can just keep track of all of that stuff. You may have heard it called revision control or source control. They're the same thing. 12 of one, half a dozen of the other. So let's take a quick stroll back through history and take a look at version control, how it started. And it's more like a very brief and incomplete history of version control. So what we're going to do is we are now in charge of updating the employee handbook. So what we do is we create a folder on our computer. We're going to call that a repository, and we're going to create employee handbook document. We're going to store that inside of there, and we're going to make all of our cool changes, and we're going to rename it to Employee Handbook 01. Then we're going to send it out, and then we get changes back. Well, now it becomes Employee Handbook Final. Send out some more changes, and suddenly it becomes Final in capitals. And I say, I know how I'm going to fix this version control problem. I'm going to put a date on it. Well, my boss doesn't like that. So it suddenly becomes Final 01 Final. This process goes on and on and on and on and on. Now I have a folder with 50 documents in it. And while I might be very close to this project, and I might know exactly where all those files are and how they went on through time, you just started working here. You just got handed this folder. They copied it onto your computer. All those file creation dates are the same now. So now where do you start from? Right? It's a very confusing, it's very untenable. I mean, I have projects and projects and projects before I got onto GitHub that were managed this way, and it was unbearable. It was crazy. So maintaining your projects like this is sort of like trying to cut a loaf of bread with a wooden doorstop, right? Eventually you'll get there. That piece of bread might not look too pretty, but you'll get there. But there has to be a better way, right? So there were some other version control systems created. CVS you may have heard of, SVN, Mercurial. But along comes this big heavyweight contender in GitHub. So GitHub is now your version control system. And the way that GitHub works is now your project is hosted on a server. And rather than maintaining 50 separate files, we now maintain one file, and GitHub does the job of tracking all of the previous versions of that file for us. So we can look back in time, we can go back in time, we can go back forward in time. There's all kinds of different version stuff that you can do with GitHub now. So it uses Git as its version control system, and it also features a ton of different social features that allow you to share your code, to work on code together, and some project management tools, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. As I mentioned, you can publish them, make your projects public, or you can make them private. So enterprises can use this as well. There's a GitHub for Enterprise. I'm not going to get into that. That's more of a bigger topic than what I'm going to get into today. Today I'm going to give you the basics, right? So my repository is on a server. So little 8-year-old me decides I'm going to update the World Employee Handbook. So now it's not just my agency employee handbook, it's the World Employee Handbook. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the file that's on the server and I'm going to pull it down locally to my computer. And that's how I make changes to it. So now I have, think of it like a photocopy, right? So you have your master copy on the server, you just photocopied that project, and now you want to make changes to it. So those changes, you make a bunch of them, and then you do what's called a commit. So what a commit does is it takes a snapshot of your project at that point in time, all of your saved files, and you can make multiple commits, as many as you want, but all that's still done locally. Your server copy is still the same, but eventually you want to make that server copy be your master copy, so you're going to do a push. You're going to push your changes back up to the server. So in our photocopy metaphor, we've sort of, in 3D space, we've moved back the original copy, and we've slid the new copy over top of it. So now all we see is the new copy, but if we dig down, we can actually see the previous copies that were part of that. You can do as many pushes as you want, as many commits as you want, and it's also known as sync. So if you already have a project that's on GitHub and say somebody made some changes, you can sync them back to your computer and back and forth to the server. But the real power of GitHub is that it's social. So I'm actually going to talk about my project team now. So now suddenly what ends up happening is I got 2 more people on my team. I got Kitty and I have Puppy. Kitty and Puppy say, well, we want to add to this project. So what they're going to do is they're going to fork my repository. And when they fork my repository, they're creating a personal copy of my original repository on GitHub. And then they're going to clone it down. Remember, they're going to photocopy it. They're going to create their own copy. And now they're going to do their changes, and they're going to make their own commits. So now they're making all their commits. My server copy, their server copy haven't changed. Then what they're going to do is they're going to push their changes up to the server. And when they push their changes up to the server, my copy is still clean here. We're still dealing with the copy that they started from in the center. And then here's where the power of GitHub comes in. Getting a little echoey, so I'm not going to go all the way up, sorry. They're actually going to request to me that I pull their changes into my repository. And every pull request has a little message attached to it. And that message says, Kitty says, Eric, I'd like you to pull these changes in. I've added the history of cats on the internet to the employee handbook. And I say, cool. But Doggy, he's got other options here. He says, what I added to the top of this is that cats are elitist jerks and that you should never trust them. And I want you to add that to the employee handbook, because that's a dog. And I look at these changes, I say, this looks cool, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to push those changes up to my server. So now my server copy, whereas before it was just my changes, that server copy has now been merged with Kitty's changes and Puppy's changes, and now we have one repository that shows all of those changes back in time. But that's a team. And I keep saying GitHub is social. And when you think of social, you don't think of just your teams. You think of the globality of it, if that's even a word. I think I might have coined that term today. Trademark Eric Steinborn, 2013. And let's give you an example of how global GitHub is. So I have a jQuery plugin that I have hosted on GitHub. People use it all over the web. And one day, I was just sitting at home on my couch, probably watching TV with my wife. The next thing I know, I get an email, and it's from my project. I think, why am I getting an email from my project? Is somebody filing a bug report or something? And I look at it, and it wasn't a bug report. It was actually this guy found my plugin. He's using it on his website. He pulled it down. He forked it. He made some changes to it. He added this really cool feature to it. And then he pushed it back up to the server, and he said, hey, I want you to take my changes and put them into your repository. I think that everybody could benefit from these changes. I said, cool. I take a look at it. He made a demo. The demo worked wonderfully. I pushed it right up to the server. Pretty cool, right? The guy's from the UK. So it wasn't some person I knew. It was some guy from across the pond that used my plugin, said I can make it better, made it better, and then asked me to put my changes back on there so that everybody could use it. I mean, we're talking global here. So it's not your friend next door, it's everywhere. So before I get into talking about how to use GitHub, I want to tell you about how ITS actually used GitHub for the first time. So back in March, we did a responsive web design SWAT team. That was organized from the CTO's office. They heard about this cool thing called responsive web design. And responsive web design in a nutshell is you create one website that scales down to mobile devices, all the way to desktop devices, all the way to projectors. But you still have functionality built into it. And the web was aflutter about it, and the CTO's office knew that it was going to be the future, and it knew that we needed to figure out how to work this. So what it did is it mobilized a team of 10 people who worked for 3 weeks full-time, co-located at the Department of Tax. Thanks, Department of Tax. What up? During that time, we made over 1,700 commits to that project. So any changes that we made, that could have been multiple files being changed. We also closed almost 900 issues. An issue is something that you open for a bug report or a new feature or changing your layout, something along those lines. And GitHub really helped facilitate that collaboration for us. And it helped us deliver some really cool things. The first thing that you may have heard about, Excelsior, was an alpha framework for responsive web design. We created that so that New York could actually start using responsive web design and play around with it, see how it works. Because responsive web design is a fundamentally different way to think about web design. It's not the web design of the 1990s where we're laying everything out with tables. It's not the web design of the 2000s. You know, it's the web design of the future. It's where we need to be. So we took all that knowledge, and we also created this getting started guide that we called Go Responsive. So you can go onto GitHub, where we have it hosted, and you can take a look, and you can actually learn about responsive web design, learn how it's different, learn how to implement it today, right? So we created this for New York State, but we also created it on GitHub, and we made it public. And because we made it public, the entire world can utilize this resource now. We're not keeping this resource to ourselves. We're not siloing in all of this code. So I've talked about version control. I've talked about a little bit about how GitHub is different. I've talked about the responsive web design sprint. So let's get into it, right? Let's set up GitHub. So some of you set up a github.com account this morning. That was really cool. We might be able to use those later on today. So we're going to show you how to sign up for a github.com account. Then we're going to install the GitHub for Windows client. There is a GitHub for Mac client for any of you Mac users out there. It's sort of the same but different. But we're only going to talk about the Windows client today, and then we're going to create our first repo. So when you log into github.com, or I'm sorry, when you visit the github.com webpage, you're going to be presented with a screen to create your username if you don't already have one. Very simple process. Give them a username that you want to be referred to as on the website. Give them an email address that you can be contacted at, and then assign a password to that username on the GitHub website. Simple. You now have a github.com account. Well, actually, the next screen, you just choose free and then hit create my account. Unless you want to pay for an account. You can if you want. Then we're going to go to windows.github.com, and we're going to download the Windows installer for GitHub. Now, a note about the installer is that it's one of those online installers, so you have to have network connectivity. So if you have proxy issues, if you have firewall issues, and you can't download this where you are, then open a ticket for your network team and try to get yourself access. ITS is working on putting something together. Nothing's been finalized yet, but be that person that nags the network team and says, hey, I want to use this. If enough people say, hey, I want to use this, maybe we'll get somewhere, right? So after the installation, we're going to start up the application. And we're going to log in using that username and password that we created earlier. And we're going to create our first repo now. So the best part about GitHub is that you don't have to create a brand new project every single time you want to use version control. You can use GitHub for existing projects. So if you have a project that you've been working on for 10 years, like my kittens project here, all you have to do is click and drag that folder into GitHub. And you could have been using another version control system as well. Click it, drag it into GitHub, and you're going to create a GitHub repository. You're prompted with a couple of different options. You're going to ask for a name. It's going to ask for a name, which it'll actually pull from the folder name. It's going to ask for a short description, so please tell us what this is, because we don't know otherwise. And then you're going to choose whether you want to push it to GitHub or not. Now, if you have an account that has private account access, which is one that you have to pay for, or if you're part of an organization that has private accounts attached to it, then you can select public or private right from here if you just choose to push it to GitHub. We're not going to push it to GitHub right now, and we're not going to talk about private repositories. We're going to talk about public repositories. So we're not going to push it to GitHub. And when we click on that button, we're going to see our repository on the bottom of the screen. So this is the GUI home screen for the Windows client. A couple things to note on this screen. First is you're going to notice a category on the bottom left that says GitHub, and then you're going to see your username. You'll see a couple other things there. Pay no attention to those. Those are just organizations. But you see E. Steinborn there for my username. When you click on that, it's going to show you a list of all of your github.com hosted repositories. Then what you need to do, remember, those are on the server, so we need to clone those onto our computer. So we're going to double-click on one of the repos, and it's going to download it locally to our machine. And when you do that, it will appear in under the local category, and then you'll see on the right-hand side that list will be populated with your local repositories. So anything that you've downloaded from there. Or repositories that you haven't pushed to GitHub yet, such as our kittens repository. So let's actually double-click on the kittens repository. We'll be brought into the repo screen on the GitHub for Windows client. And on this screen, you'll see at the top left a thing that says initial commit. And it says uncommitted changes, because we haven't actually sent any changes up to GitHub yet. So we're going to type in initial commit into that message box, because we haven't made any changes. If next time we make changes to it, that box we would type in, added 5 kittens, added 7 kittens, something along those lines, just a general idea of what you just finished. And then we're going to hit the button underneath there, and we're going to commit it, and then you're going to see it under your unsynced commits. And to sync a commit or push a commit up to GitHub's servers, you're going to click on that push to GitHub button at the top. You click on that button, it does all the magic in the background, and now you have a publicly hosted GitHub repository. Your commit now shows in the history of commits rather than an unsynced commits or uncommitted changes. And every time you make a new commit, it will just be added to that stack. So that's where you can go through and you can check the history of the different changes that you've made to your repository. As an example of seeing some changes, if you look at one of the files on the right-hand side, so let's click on the index file, you're going to see what's called a diff list or a differences list. And that list shows you a line-by-line differentiation between your old copy of that file on the server and your new copy. So your old line will be in red, your new line will be in green right underneath it. Line by line, every line that you've changed will show up in this GUI this way. So we changed hello world to hey there world, and now if we push those to the server, hey there world would be the copy that we see. Now if you've already pushed your repository to github.com, then you're going to see a sync button there at the top instead of a push button, because we're just going to be syncing the changes back and forth from our local machine to the server. That's it, right? That's how you create a commit, create a GitHub repo, and an in-depth overview of the GitHub for Windows client, because it's really easy to use. There's not too much more to it than that. I understand it might be a little daunting at first, but like many things with computers, you really need some hands-on experience. So we have a lab at the end of the presentation after questions where you can actually make your first commit right on the GitHub for Windows client, right in the front of the room here. So speaking of that hands-on experience, one other time that ITS used GitHub, we'll have questions at the end if that's okay. Thanks. Just recently, actually, we wrapped up a SWAT team for DMV. So the history of that is that DMV was recreating their registration and renewal application online. They were creating a website that you could go to re-register your car, your boat, your snowmobile, or your trailer. I may be missing something there, but that's the general idea. You can re-register your car online now. Well, when it launches. And because it's a public website, of course, they wanted to make it responsive. And the best way to do responsive, or to make it mobile friendly, and the best way to make it mobile friendly is to make it responsive. But at the time, DMV was kind of strapped for developers, so they asked the CTO's office for help, and the CTO's office said, all right, let's mobilize another SWAT team. Now, this SWAT team was comprised a little bit differently than the last SWAT team. So this SWAT team only had 8 people on it, and those 8 people only worked for 2 days of full-time work. So rather than 3 weeks from the responsive web design sprint, we had 2 days of in-person work. Then we had a week of what we called 20% time or part-time, where we were able to work at when we could find time to work on this project. Over that time, though, just 2 days full-time, a week part-time, we were able to publish over 250 commits and close over 250 issues. Again, bug reports, change the font size, change the logo size, things along those lines. But we were able to do it remotely, right? And by doing it remotely, we were able to create the first fully responsive transactional application for New York State. Hasn't launched yet. Somebody might beat us to the punch. But more importantly, what we did was we created a reusable template for DMV to create more applications from here on out. So let's talk about license renewal. Let's talk about permit applications, things along those lines. None of that's official. I'm just saying, think of the possibilities that you can use this framework for, right? So while the responsive web design team proved that we could research a topic, this team proved that we could actually collaborate in a way that New York State hasn't seen before and do it remotely. Because it wasn't just 8 people, it was 8 people in 4 different agencies and 4 different buildings. And we all weren't working at the same time. We were working at whenever we were able to. You know, this 20% time might have been 9 to 10 for me. It might have been 10 to 11 for somebody else. We were allowed to chime in on this at any time, 24/7, because of GitHub, right? I mean, this is what ITS has been talking about. For those of you that aren't in ITS, ITS is about cross-cluster collaboration. It's about finding new ways to do things. And I think it broke, this SWAT team broke what we thought was previously collaboration. And it would not have been possible if it weren't for one single directive, which is use github.com. Because without github.com, you just have version control. You don't have the project management suite. You don't have the social coding, sharing, all of this stuff that's done there. It has these unique features that allow you to do this type of remote collaboration with ease. So let's get into github.com now. So when you first log into the website, you're going to see your news feed. Your news feeds, when you first create your account, will be rather bare, but as you start to use them more, you'll start to see things like the activity of people that you're following, repos that you're watching, and any kind of issues that you've either been assigned to or you're tracking, right, for projects. Think of it like your Facebook feed, but instead of pictures of half-eaten lunches and your friends' latest Candy Crush scores, you're actually seeing developers and projects that you love and admire and are following and watching. Every user also has their own user page. So this is an example of my user page on GitHub. On the top right, you'll see a little follow button. When you follow a user, you'll be able to see them in your news feed. They'll be added automatically. So any new activity that they do, any pushes, any new repos that they create, any issues they comment on, you'll be able to see those because we're talking about a social coding platform here. On the left-hand side in the middle, you'll see popular repositories. So that's a list of all of my top repositories on github.com. On the right of that, you'll see a list of all of the repositories that I've actually contributed to. So not necessarily my own personal repositories, but repositories that I have shared code with. And then underneath that, there's a cute little graph showing you my contributions over time. It's a year's worth of time in that little guy there. So every repo also has its own repo page. So this is an example of my jQuery ListNav plugin, the plugin that I talked about earlier. And there's a couple things to note on here. The first thing is a description. So this tells you at a glance what is this repository, what does it do, as long as the developer has filled that in. And then a short synopsis of how the life of the project is going, how many people are contributing to it, how many times they've made changes, and then the files are underneath that. That's where your indexes go. That's where your CSS goes. That's where your PHP goes. That's where your JSPs go. On the right-hand side, there's a really cool list of tabs here. Now, those tabs bring you to, I say they're really cool because they bring you to really cool features. So by proxy, they are cool. Off screen underneath that, you'll see two buttons. Couldn't fit them all on the screen at once, sorry. You'll see a clone button and a download button. Two very different things. You click on that clone and desktop button and it'll actually clone that repo right in the GitHub for Windows client for you immediately. You're able to access the full gamut of version control that has happened throughout time for that project. But if you just want to use that, so if you say you just want to use my plugin, you don't care about the version control behind it, you'll update it on your own. You click that download and zip, and all that does is download just the files for that repository. You don't get any version control stuff there. Now you could, in essence, create your own version control off of that zip if you wanted to, but the idea is you can just download this thing right now and start using it. There's two buttons on the top, the watch and the star buttons. To watch a repo adds the activity, all the activity from that repository into your news feed. And then the star button is sort of like your favorites. So you bookmark this repository to take a look at on your stars page later on. So we talked about forking earlier, and there's actually a button right next to those buttons called fork. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to fork a repo off of github.com. So what you're going to do is right next to that star button, there's a fork button. You click on that button one time. It shows you a cute little animated GIF showing you that it's photocopying that repository. And then it's available for you immediately. You can start using that repository in your projects. You can modify it. You can fix bugs in it. And the whole point here that we're talking about is, let's say you fixed a bug. Why not send the changes back to the original repository owner, right? We're working together to create better projects. And I understand that being that we're such a large group, that I'm really asking you to break down the walls of the traditional ways that you think about programming, where we program all of our projects in silos, and we keep all of our code private, and we don't want to accept any criticism on our code, and we all know that we're doing it all right. But what I'm asking you to do today is to take that code and publish it if you can. I understand that sometimes we can't publish code, but publish that code if you can, share it, accept help from it, accept criticism from it, and become a better developer because of it. And your projects are only going to benefit in the long run. I've yet, within 3 teams working on GitHub as our primary collaboration tool, I've yet to find somebody who sits there, puts their hands on their hips and says, well, I don't like that gosh darn GitHub. It's too stupid because it has way too many cool features that make my life a lot easier. Right? It only helps breed this collaboration. It only helps bring teams together and keep them motivated and keep them apprised of all of these different things that are going on. I mean, it's great for tiny little one-off projects, one file if you wanted to keep stuff, all the way up to gigantic projects. Think of your gigantic projects that you have right now. Imagine if now you can start having 2 people editing the same file at the same time. Imagine that you don't have to be committing to the server every single time you want to commit. You do all your commits locally. There are many version control systems out there that actually require you to, even before you're able to send your changes up, that you have to be online to do that. You can do all of your editing offline, doing all of your commits offline. You can be on a plane, you can be on a train, you can be in a submarine, you can be on the moon. And then when you come back and you have internet access, you push all those changes back up to the server, and now everybody can take advantage of that code that you worked on while you were, on the lunar surface. A lot of other version control systems restrict the type of workflow that you can use. GitHub, you choose your own workflow. Teams will choose their own workflow for the team. So you can do there's tons of stuff to research on branching and workflows, and I'll give some links to that later on, but we're not going to get too far into that. But as I said, it breeds that long distance collaboration because of these crazy project management tools that it has. You have a wiki for every single page. So you need to teach somebody how to use your project, boom, you have a wiki for that. You create your wiki and it's public. if you want it to be public. If you have a private repo, it's private. There's a dynamic issue tracker that you can take advantage of. We'll talk about that next. Everybody has code standards. Code standards could be, I need semicolons at the end of my lines of code. I need curly brackets around this specific thing this way. Well, with GitHub, say somebody pushes up a change and it doesn't have a semicolon and it doesn't have curly braces where it should. Well, you're the person that's looking at the code and you're going to deny their pull request. And it's not a personal vendetta. It's not, I don't like you. It's your code didn't follow the standards, and I'm going to write a note to you saying, hey, you missed a semicolon here. Hey, you missed a curly brace here. You're going to get that back. You're going to say, oh, silly me, I forgot those things. You're going to change those, put your pull request back in, and then they're going to pull your changes back into the server, and then everybody's happy. So you have code review built right into your workflow now, as well as a project dashboard that you can actually take a look at your entire project as a whole from a bird's eye view and see how everything is going. Project managers can talk to you. So the issue tracker is incredibly robust because you can use it for just about anything. We'll talk about a couple things. We'll talk about tracking bugs. So I found a bug that when I click on the navigation, it doesn't open up the navigation. So I'm going to file that. I'm going to open up a ticket. I'm going to file it as a bug, and I'm going to say, this is a bug. We all had a meeting today, and we found out that, well, I think that our heading font should be Comic Sans. So I'm going to open up an issue for that, and I'm going to put in that it's an enhancement. How many times have you had an email back and forth that gets spidered off into some crazy spider web where somebody isn't replying all or somebody's replying too many reply alls, and you can't keep track of a conversation? Well, ask your question on a GitHub issue. So, hey, last Thursday, everybody wasn't available for our morning meeting. Can we all make sure we're available for this morning meeting? And then everybody will reply, yes, I'm available, but I actually had a doctor's appointment. So I'm going to say, hey, I have a doctor's appointment Thursday morning. And my project manager is going to say, well, let's reschedule for Friday when everybody's here. And now everybody has been kept apprised of all those changes that have happened on that issue. You can take issues and assign them to individual users. So I'm really great with JavaScript, so I'm actually going to assign myself to this navigation problem because I know it's a JavaScript bug. But Sally may be really good with fonts on the web, and she's going to actually be assigned to the font issue that we had earlier. When you're assigned to an issue, you're notified immediately, and any time that somebody comments on an issue that you're assigned to, you're notified as well. So you have all these new ways of tracking things. And by the way, project managers all know about milestones. We all know about milestones. You have to hit your milestones. Take all those issues. Take as many issues as you want. You don't have to put all of them in. Put in 3 of them if you want into a milestone. So you create a milestone that has a date and has a title. So we have a beta milestone and we have a rollout milestone. Each one of those, you're going to see issues that are attached to them. When an issue is closed, it will increment up your percentage. Now, 50% on this screen, it's zoomed in, so it goes out for a little while. So it's not actually 80% on the website. And keeping track of all these things might be crazy, right? You're thinking, I'm going to have to scroll through this big, long list of all of these different things, and I'm going to have to see what's open, what's closed. I'm not going to be able to see them very easily. But they actually have this thing called Pulse, which is your project dashboard. So you're going to see all of the activity of your repository at a glance. The first thing you're going to see is your pull requests over time. So how many changes have been made to your project recently? Well, actually, I'm sorry, from the beginning of time of your project. Then you're going to see an overview of all the issues that are attached to your project. So any of those issues we talked about, you're going to see a big list of them. And you're going to see underneath that, really, this is the overview. You see closed and open. And then underneath that, you're actually going to see a giant list of 156 issues, all laid out, showing you exactly which ones are open, which ones are closed, their titles. So you're able to keep track of all these things rather than updating these crazy long spreadsheets with tons of questions and tons of milestones and tons of issues that come up during meetings. Whenever we would have a meeting, we would open up an issue right in the meeting, and it was tracked immediately. There wasn't writing it down on paper and then comprising an email later on. This is really cool collaboration tools. The last thing I want to talk about, the pulse screen, is this individual contributions list. So you're able to see at a glance how well are your people performing at creating project changes. So you might see that there are 2 people that maybe are not committing as making as many changes as they should be, right? So you talk to one person, and actually it turns out they actually were having problems getting GitHub.com set up. So you talk to them, you get them set up with GitHub.com, their contributions shoot through the roof. Your other developer has a few more than that other person, so you know GitHub.com is working for them, but you talk to them and they don't understand the new coding standard because it had just been changed. So you grab one of your higher performing people, you sit them down, you pair program with them, you support your teams. Now that person has a much better understanding of how this project works and how your code standards are working, and now their productivity shoots through the roof. Because as we know, combined individual performance equals your team's performance, and your team's performance equals your overall project performance. If one of those pieces is broken, then the whole project is going to suffer because of that. So we're talking about contributing. Let's also talk about how these gigantic companies that are out there are using GitHub. We have these people posting some of the most important projects on the web out on GitHub.com, Google, jQuery, Android. And they are all taking advantage of the contributions of thousands of developers. So it's not just Twitter working on Twitter Bootstrap anymore. It's Twitter plus 1,000 other people who have added code to this. I mean, I hope you're starting to see that the benefit of having your stuff out there means that you're going to benefit from having people help you through the time. And that's just the beginning. I pulled a lot of content out of the presentation that was really, really advanced, or even mildly advanced, because this group is mostly a hands-off group, other than the lab in the beginning and the lab at the end. What we really need is hands-on experience. We need to start using this today, right? But what I want you to do is I want you to start learning more. I want you to level up, because I'm a gamer, right? I love video games, and in video games, when you gain enough experience, you level up. And what I want to do is congratulate you guys today because you're all level 2 GitHubbers. You can go home, tell your wife, tell your kids, tell your dog, tell your cat. Be excited about this. You've taken the first step at learning about GitHub and learning about this new social coding paradigm that all of these gigantic companies are using. You saw in that video that the CTO of Mozilla said, I don't know any new startup that isn't on GitHub. But level up even more. There's so many other more advanced, but not too advanced things that you can learn about, like pull requests. We talked about pull requests today, and there's a process behind them and how that works. So learn about pull requests. Level up. Learn about different branching workflows. I use branching workflows every day. They're amazing. We got into really basic stuff today. Branching workflows is where it's at. GitHub Pages, to tell you the truth, this presentation is a project. And that project is hosted on GitHub, and we're actually viewing this project from a GitHub Pages hosted account. So the URL is not, I'm not doing it locally. This is esteinborn.github.io. So this information is out there on how to host these things. It's super simple, and I would urge everybody to have a GitHub Pages repository or GitHub Pages branch on their repository so that they can show off their great work to people. And the 900-pound elephant, I'm going to call it, because it's bigger than a gorilla, right? This is giant. Merge conflicts. They're a pain in the butt. Everybody hates them. When you're dealing with version control, you're going to have merge conflicts. Learn how to fix your merge conflicts, because every merge conflict can be resolved, but you just have to know how to do it. So after you've taken a look at some things that you want to learn, you can use some of these resources on how to actually get better at Git. You can learn why Git's better than other version control systems like SVN or Mercurial. You can also get together and learn how to use Git on the command line, because everything we've done today can also be done on the command line if you're a command line nerd like me. And there's also a free book called Pro Git that's available. It's free online, so you can use that to actually make your to level yourself up too. There's also Yammer for those of us who have access to Yammer. You have email. Send somebody that you know who has GitHub experience an email. Send me an email if you need help. I always try to make myself available to help people out to really get this stuff started, because we need to be on GitHub. We need to be using this as our primary development tool. These forum meetings are great, right? I want to thank the forum for letting me put this thing on. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I love GitHub, and I think it's unbelievably awesome. But what I want you to do is I want you to start today. I don't want you to take this knowledge, put it in the back of your mind, and think about it 6 months later. I want you to start today. I want you to come down to the front row here at the end of the day, and or after questions, and if you haven't made a GitHub commit, I want you to make your first GitHub commit today. There's no better time to start than the present, right? I want you to start today. It might seem hard at first, and it could be. But once you get your feet wet, you're going to start diving in, and you're going to start today. When you're at the top of that bridge and you're about to jump down with all of your friends, that water looks way further down than it was when you were looking at it when you were looking at that bridge from the water. But it really isn't, because the first thing you do is you start today. You take a baby step, and you take a baby step, and you take a baby step, and eventually you're running, and you didn't even realize it. So take today to start using GitHub and getting it to work for you. Thank you.